Hi there, in today's video we're going to be filling in section 13.2 part B on trig equations, okay, where it's asking us to rearrange the equations before we begin to solve them. So sometimes and most often during exam questions or exam style questions, exam level questions, we will be asked to rearrange our equations first before we can then solve them. So what we've seen just now, a quick recap, is we've seen us solving when we've been given sin x or cos x or tan x equals a positive value, and also when it is a negative value. The problem we'll see today is when we're given equations, we need to rearrange it to get it to go into that form first before we can identify where on our cast diagram that our answers lie. Okay, so this is the first question in your notes, so I'm going to ask you to make sure you're copying this down as we're doing it. And we need to solve when cos of x plus 2 equals 1.4. Okay, so I need to end up with cos x equals, that's my aim. So I can't do my cast diagram until I get cos x equals. Okay, I've got cos x plus 2 equals 1.4. So I need to get rid of this plus 2. So how do we get rid of a plus 2? Okay, we'll subtract 2 on both sides. Therefore, what I'm left with is now cos of x equals negative 0.6. Okay, and now I can see that cos x will have to equal a negative value. I don't have anything else apart from just cos x on this side. I can now go forward and begin to solve. Okay, so I'm going to get my cast diagram out again, making sure we annotate fully. So give myself plenty of space. So first quadrant all, sine, tan, cos. Put in my degrees, starting off at 0, up to 90, down to 180, all the way down to 270. Then we back up to 360, which is back up to the start of a cycle, which is 0. Okay, first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, and fourth quadrant. Okay, so all these should be known. The only thing I've missed out, which I'm going to add in just now, is my rule. So the rule is if it's in the first quadrant, it's my answer x. Second quadrant, if my answer lies there, is 180 minus x. Third quadrant is 180 plus x. And last quadrant is 360 minus x. Okay, so I'm now thinking of my question. So I've got cos x equals negative 0.6. So when cos is positive, I'd be ticking the all in the cos quadrants. However, because it's negative, I then tick the opposite. That's what we practiced last time. So it's going to be the second and third quadrant where my answer lies. Remembering the negative's now done its job. I am not going to be I'm not going to put the negative in my calculator. We never do that. So we still need to find our answer for x in my first quadrant. It's just not going to be one of my solutions. Okay, so it's going to be when cos x equals, now we drop the negative and we solve for when it equals 0.6. Okay, so we'll take the cos inverse of that. And that will give me an answer of 53.1301 continued, which will go down to 53.13 degrees. Okay, so that is what hopefully you get in your calc as well. So that's going to be my value for x. Let's now try and find where my answers lie. So my first answer lies in my second quadrant. So the rule for the second quadrant is 180 minus my answer x, which will be 180 minus 53.13 degrees, which equals the answer 126.87. 126.87 degrees. Okay. Third quadrant's where my second answer lies, and that's going to be the rule where I do 180 plus my answer x. So that's going to be 180 plus 53.13, and I get the answer 233.13 degrees. Okay, so my solutions, remember we've got two solutions. I'm not picking the first quadrant, that's what I had to use, however it's not where my answer lay. My answer lay in the second and third quadrant, so my answer is when x is 126.87 degrees and when it also equals 233.13 degrees. Okay, so very similar to what we've been doing, we just had to rearrange the equation in order to get our two answers there. Okay, we'll move on to the second question in our notes now. So our job's now to solve when 5 sin x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so again we're going to rearrange that. First thing I want to get rid of is this minus 2, so we're going to add 2 to both sides. Therefore, if I do that, that gives me the answer 5 sin x equals 2. Okay, still don't have what I want just sin x equals, so I'm going to have to divide both sides by 5. Okay, so we'll divide both sides by 5. Now, even though this will work out as a nice decimal, my advice, just leave it as a fraction. Okay, if I've got 2 and I divide that by 5, it becomes 2 over 5. We're going to put this in a calculator anyway, folks, so your calculator can do the hard work for you. Don't bother changing it to a decimal, especially when we are going to be given, well, when you'll be working through the exercise, your fractions might not become nice decimals. You're always better just leaving it as a fraction, okay? However, I've got what I want. I've got sin x equals, okay? And it equals something positive. It's got positive 2 over 5. So, let's get my cast diagram out, and now let's think about when sin will be positive. Okay, so put my degrees on. It's always good to do this. Make sure, you're probably used to this by now, but make sure you're filling in this completely. It's very easy, especially in exam situations where nerves could kick in or during a test. You've got all the information written here, so you can always refer back to it during the question, okay? So the first quadrant, that'll be my answer x. Second quadrant is when it's 180 minus x. Third quadrant, 180 plus x. And fourth quadrant, 360 minus x. Okay, so we've got those inputs there. We now go back to a question. I've got now rearranged way of saying sin x equals 2 over 5. So sin x is something positive. When would that be? That would be when all graphs are positive. Sin would be positive in there, so the first quadrant, and also in the second quadrant when sin is positive. Okay, so they're going to be our our two answers in the first and second quadrant. So let's find out in the first quadrant now. So the first quadrant is going to be when sin x equals 2 over 5. Let's rearrange that. That's going to be when x equals the sine inverse of 2 over 5. Use your fraction button on your calculator. Keeps everything nice and neat. And what we get when we do that is we get 23.5781 continued. That's what we should get anyway. Let me just extend my page a bit so I've got more space. X equals 23.57 degrees. Okay, so that's actually one of my answers. I now need to work out where my second answer lies. So my second answer lies in my second quadrant. The rule for the second quadrant is I do 180 minus my answer for x. That's going to be 180 minus 23.57 degrees. And that gives me the answer 100 and, did I say 57? That should be 58, my apologies. Let me change that. You're probably all screaming at the video saying you've got that wrong. There we are, change it to 58. That'll be changed to 58 as well. And that should give me an answer of 156.42 degrees. Okay, again, at the end, make sure you note or you tell the person marking it what your two solutions are. So my first one lay in my first quadrant, which is 23.58, if I can remember to write it properly this time, and when it's 156.42 degrees. Okay, so those are my two answers. So you'll see it's very, very similar to what we've been doing. The only difference is we've had to rearrange the equations to start with. Okay, so just to recap, you've got to rearrange your equations like you would do normally with normal equations. Main thing is you can only do your cast diagram, or you can only tell which quadrants you're going to be finding answer once you've got it down to cos x equals, sin x equals, or tan x equals, okay? If you've got to rearrange more, you need to do that first, okay? Remembering, if your answer is negative, that tells you what quadrants you're picking, but it does not go into the calculator like that first example in our notes. Okay, thank you for listening.